bit of more time. I will now leave the floor to Réjeanne Senac, who is a research fellow at the Sciences Po, the CEVIPOF. That's a research lab. Réjeanne Senac has a specific curriculum pathway. She has a multidisciplinary approach, which can provide us with a relevant approach. She holds a PhD in political thinking. She's also a graduate in law, and she's also holding a philosophy degree at the University of Paris. So at the crossroads of all those fields, she's working on the current expression of the principle of equality. This principle of equality will be questioned from different aspects, different point of view, ranging from the usage of parity and diversity to for the so-called gender theory. So gender Réjeanne Senac, sorry, will have 20 minutes, so you can ask your questions for after, and for our third speaker as well, who will be speaking after Réjeanne Senac. So, good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me today to speak. I'm not a media specialist. What I will be presenting you to do, and that will create a bridge with what Christian Batella has just mentioned. After the so-called suburbs upheaval in 2005, the diversity term was very much used in the media, in the French media. So we talked about the so-called minister from immigrant or diversity background, such as a sports person coming from a diversity background. It's also a soft law, charters, labels. So we'll try to see with you what that tells us about our principle of equality in our society, since the diagnostic at the end of the day is the inequality or the underrepresentation of people featuring different background at different level of power in the medias or at the political level, etc. So what does that tell us about the actual principle of equality? I am here in Brittany, and I would like to start by showing, I want to show you that this diversity term is anchored in French history. And if we read historians such as Fernand Braudel or Lucien Febvre, we can think that France refers to itself as being diverse, thinks it is diverse, since it is not uniform. There's not a cultural uniformity nor a geographical one in the relationship of what it is to be a French person, a French citizen, especially through that book, the Tour de France by two children, that was published at the end of the 19th century, where we show that in Brittany the countryside is different, the food is different. If you go to Alsace, for instance, things are different, and etc. So that idea that France is diverse is part of the French national narrative. But this diversity is also an identity acknowledgement, so we must acknowledge the regional diversity if the nation, the modern nation, is recognized as being structuring, unifying French institution. What will emerge in the 20th century after the 2005 social upheaval is a use of the term is the recognition of the identity and to be assigned to a community, if either truly or falsely, if it's ethno-cultural, or if people have a special faith, especially when people are Muslim, people can be assigned to a given type of identity, even for people actually not a Muslim, for instance, but they can have a first name which sounds Muslim, but this assignment leads to discrimination, and this is a specificity when we refer to the more oldest usage of this term. We can say, as Norway, that it is a new speak. We are all in favor of diversity. We are all against starvation in the world. We are all for peace. What does that mean to be for diversity, to promote diversity? What can we do to promote diversity? Can we apply in the 20th century the principle of equality, equal opportunities, which come first in the terminology used in the French Republic and the French politician in particular? So we can depoliticize, since we have the feeling that we want to manage the diversity, so it's more a British or US way of using that term and to work with this issue. It brings politics out of the field, since we think there is no choice when dealing with diversity. We are experiencing economic, social crisis, so it has nothing to do with politics, but it is something which is needed, and in bringing politics out of the issues, it is well, fighting against discrimination, fighting against racism and sexism, heteronormativity, all those words which are quite important and difficult to deal with sometimes. What I will show you is how the promotion of the diversity is a political issue, since it supports the justice and equal opportunities principles, since it implies the political actors and stakeholders with the economical one, and journalists are part of that. So I would like to have analyzed some reports, international reports, reports made by think tanks. We talked about the Institut Montaigne, which is a famous French think tank. But I will also do that short presentation. I will not get into details on the basis of two surveys, one I did in 2008, 2009, thanks to the collaboration of religious association stakeholders who told me what is diversity today in France. So I worked with 163 different people in France representing different communities, bodies, associations, and so on. And I wanted to meet those people and ask them what was their definition of the diversity. And at the time, we wanted to institutionalize the world. The commissioner for equality was appointed. At the time, Nicolas Sarkozy, the former French president, did a speech in Paris also as to promote the diversity term, and there was a charter for diversity which came. And then I want to draw a parallel with a recent survey I did for the defender of the rights, the commissioner for the rights, for working for the Ministry of Justice. And I had different interviews with different institutions, managers and representatives. I worked with the ALD, the Commissioner for Rights. So I worked with the unions, labor unions, and I want to do a comparison, which I won't have time to do, unfortunately, with Netherlands. It's interesting in terms of integration model. We can have the impression that France is integrating communities and wants to put people under the same template or the same model. But Netherlands wanted to work on a more multicultural aspect, allowing people to reflect more their culture openly. So maybe bringing the politics into what has when politics has been taken out of the field. What is interesting is we can think about the emergence of the diversity, the promotion of this term at the 20th century has been, and the big French corporate companies can accept these issues of diversity, the idea being that big companies have used the issue of diversity and have used the term and promoted the term and the issue, and it has to do with soft law, but we can have another interpretation, which is the Republican aspect, which would actually favor the social merits of young pupils coming from deprived areas, so as to further them and help them to access high standards university. So it's a positive discrimination. So, and I think there's a joint action, and I will illustrate this. First of all, the Charter for Diversity and the label for diversity, and I want here to say that I am following the work done by Franck Cauchois. The promotion of diversity was a way to counterpart the anti-discrimination laws. So businesses have actually managed this well. They do not provide any penalties. There are no penalties applied to businesses, but having corporate responsibilities for businesses is important. Companies stage their corporate responsibility through this diversity issue. So we want to fight hard law, discriminatory law, and this is also used by the public bodies. So there's two movements, both by the Charter of Diversity came after a report written by Yadik Zaberg and Laurence Melani. Yadik Zaberg was appointed a commissioner for diversity, and I interviewed him just before he was appointed, and he wrote a report about the people, the forgotten of the equal opportunities. And it was very interesting, since we saw during the presentation that in France, the term of integration is actually hiding in social integration. We want people to adhere to be assimilated, really, rather than being integrated. So this charter was born further to the report published by the Institut Montaigne, a French think tank. It was promoted by the minister in charge of equal opportunities, Azouz Bekar, who traveled through France so as to promote this charter, so as to stop any legal problems pertaining to this. The Charter for Equality was also promoted by Human Resources, and it was launched in September 2007. So you may not remember that name, the Ministry of Integration and National Identity. And so I interviewed at the time the minister in charge of this dossier, Mr. Eric Besson, and he told that, well, people are first of all immigrants, and then they are assimilated, integrated. So we need to work on the social aspect so that not too many people migrate to France. So there are some connections between private and public actors, and maybe we need to untwin a few things here. What does the charter and the label say? Well, the positive aspect of discrimination is important. I don't know if you know the number of criteria, legal criteria, pertaining to the fight against criteria. There are 25 items, 25 criteria, and the label or the Charter for Diversity are supposed to be the positive aspect of this law. But the way it is publicized, advertised, both by private and public actors, unfortunately, is focused on the answer so as to answer to the social problems that exist in France, so that respond to the social issues dividing France, and the fact that France is socially split, and there are great divide in the society. So the people coming from different immigrant backgrounds are racialized, the non-white are actually affected. And not only those who come from French overseas territories, and I interviewed person in charge of the French overseas territories, and those people are affected by discrimination, which is similar to that experienced by immigrants. So we can see that there is a real blur here in terms of law and common law as well, but there is justification of this diversity, not to have with penalties, but we has to. Well, there is an idea of it's like a win-win situation. It's like an enchantment, neoliberal Republican enchantment. We have everything to win, nothing to lose when it comes to favoring diversity. Diversity is good for business, so it's good to promote diversity, and therefore you will gain some market share, you will provide another vision to the business. So the idea, okay, we use the Republican idea and principle of equality, but we want to recognize the different cultural backgrounds and cultures. But of course, we must be profitable. Businesses must be profitable, and diversity must be profitable. So I'm one of the people who want to highlight the fact that having the we can have the principle of equality and profitability are two different things. We can do one thing without the other. So I will mention the report made by France Stratégie, which is entitled "The Cost of the Discrimination." In that report, it is said that if we stop to discriminate people, especially women and non-white, so they do not use the term non-white, but it is similar to that, we would have an increase in GDP of 7%. So beyond the fact that it is not economically sound, we wrote an article in Le Monde about this, and we didn't think it was a sound, there was no scientific sound. So either the white heterosexual man will be advantaged, or the Jewish homosexual women will be promoted. So, but we cannot multiply the positions. So some people will lose. So we are staging, diversity is staged, and it is said that it is good for business. So this has two effects. First of all, it can be very optimistic scenario, including people who were discriminated will provide an added value, whether it is social, political. If we can prove that it is profitable, and I think we can prove that it is not profitable, the issue is that the means are conditions for what we are trying to achieve. If you cannot support equality but complementarity, so we are expecting from that they can provide something else.
So, for example, if you talk about women in management or women in journalism, will have a different perspective. I wrote an article about that for Libération. For example, women journalists in politics were there with Françoise Giraud to say that it's not much of an argument, but women in political journalists could have information that the men couldn't get. Politicians at the time being mostly men. And so we had this idea that women were going to do different type of journalism, other news, deal with it differently. And these women journalists in the 21st century realized that this justification determined how they did their job, because they were seen as women and not as political journalists. Similarly, those from diversity, as it were seen as representatives of diversity and not as journalists. So, in addition, they would get comments like, for example, outside the French National Assembly, I'm going to go for the girl with the nicest dressed. I don't think he's going to go and say, I'm going to go to talk to the guy with the nicest tie. So there's this boxing into an encultured identity, the idea that women will do things differently. And so this is an unholy alliance between neoliberalism and racism and benevolent sexism. They are included for the same reasons that they were excluded. We include those women that were excluded with logic that says their singularity was incompatible with reason. They were more instinctive. They were included with the idea that their singularity would be added value. We don't get out of this thinking of complementarity, which does not it's not the same as imagining you as someone similar. With diversity, people don't imagine themselves as similar, they imagine themselves as complementary, and that locks them into their identity. So to conclude very briefly, how have I encountered the connection with sport and news in my investigation in 2008 and 2009? I interviewed many political stakeholders because I wanted to see the way in which this was being politicized. I interviewed 8 members of Nicolas Sarkozy's cabinet and a technical advisor for diversity issues in the city, Rachid Kassi, and he said the following: the practical implementation of the ideal of the Republican meritocracy can be related to the philosophy of sport, because, according to him, sport is where you chose the best without looking at color or background. So that is pure meritocracy. May the best win. And so there is this myth of Republican meritocracy or meritocracy in sports. And he quoted the French football team where he said, and I quote, "Blacks because they're the best and not because they're black." So when I wrote my book, Talking About Diversity was the title. This is not the World Cup victory as it was in 1998, but in the midst of a controversy with a survey by Mediapart at the end of April 2011 on French Football Federation's discrimination criteria, there was an instruction given by the national management to restrict to 30% the number of African or North African origin to 30% in national selection trials, and that was recorded evidence. So this broke into this idea of Republican meritocracy, particularly as it applies to sport, in which theoretically everything is just talent-based, because this quota was justified by the French Football Federation by the idea that black and white, the political fiction, of course, when I talk in those terms, racism is created on that basis. This idea that on the basis of the color of our skin, we do not have the same sporting qualities. So some whites needed to be included because they were supposed to be more strategic, I seem to remember the thinking was, and racializing them was just a quicker way of saying that. So to conclude, when you're working on evaluation of public policy, that is quite a trendy research topic. Promoting diversity does not refer to a right or a duty. We cannot make any claim on the basis of diversity. It is based on goodwill. But with regard to positioning, with regard to the media, the issue, Ronald Dawkins, particularly his work on evaluation of diversity promotion through quotas in US universities, on that subject he says, what is the aim of these policies? Is it to erase disadvantageous differences, or to have a recognition policy allowing difference to be valued? And it can be seen that there is a difference between different goals. What is the aim of these diversification policies, be it in school, media, training, sport? Is the idea to live up to our republican ideals, in which, irrespective of our individual characteristics, we can be recognized on the basis of our merits and our talents? Or do we reshape some form of neo-existentialism in which we represent interest groups or different qualities on the basis of our sex, skin color, etc.? Is the aim to have a post-gender, post-racial society in which we're all fully equal, or is it modernizing complementarianism? And there's a finally, diversity promotion is often talked about as the cherry on the cake, in the sense that performance, there's added value to equality, but the cherry may in fact poison the cake. Sorry about my lousy metaphors. The idea is that if we use this argument of profitability of diversity, be it for media, sport, public policy makers, if we show that this is an economic and social differentiator that is not profitable, I think it can be demonstrated. Research shows that, as used by the Front National, says that immigration is not profitable, that we can close the borders on that basis. So with a war of figures and govern purely through figures, if we could prove that discrimination was profitable, I think that could be, the argument could be made. We say that we should promote gender equality because it's profitable, but perhaps it would be very profitable to prohibit women from working. That would bring down the unemployment rate overnight. Profitability arguments could justify things which are ideologically unacceptable if we believe in equality. So be aware of that, and the fact that we are in a period in which, on the grounds that we are no longer allowed to rethink policy as and think of it just as managing what is possible. John Scott said politics and policy is negotiating the impossible. It is the interval between what we live, the established order, and the horizon towards which we seek to travel, which by definition is always an unrealistic utopia, as Kant said. Thank you for your attention.